Good morning, everyone. This is Tracy Wick, and today is the third part of our executive briefing on critical actions to take to make your numbers in the new normal. With me today is Karen Douglas, and perhaps more than any of the other sessions, I was most looking forward to this because today we're talking about sales coaching. I love the title, Informal, Infrequent, and Ineffective, because for those of you on the call, that's probably your experience. And yet there's something about coaching that is perhaps the most impactful in terms of driving performance. So as we think about your portfolio companies as well as sales organizations in general, there's probably no topic that would give you better results than sales coaching. So with that, I'm going to turn to Karen. A couple of housekeeping items though. Ideally, we would be sitting across from one another and we would be able to see your face. Since we can't, please do use the chat function here for questions, because we've really designed today's content to be pragmatic so that when you get back to your desk, you can use some of the techniques and the tools here that we're talking about. And so again, with that, the deck will also be available after, as well as a recording. With that, Karen, take it away.
Great, thanks Tracy, and hello and welcome everybody. Just a little bit about myself. Karen Douglas. I've worked in the space of sales performance effectiveness for around about 30 years in talent assessment and development, coaching, sales organization consulting, and I ran a team in Europe for a sales performance improvement company of about 30 people, and during that time I was managing and coaching that team. I'm also an accredited coach with the EMCC and have a background in organizational and positive psychology, so bring that to my coaching experience. As Tracy said, this is the third in our webinar series targeted at PE firms. The intention was to give you some information about the sales function that enables you to objectively review sales function in your portfolio and target companies. We tend to look at sales performance through the lens of 4 key areas: talent, pipeline, enablement, and leadership. The first of our webinars was on talent. If you weren't able to join that, then do get in touch with us. We can send you the recording from that one. And really what we were looking at there is, how do you identify the right people and bring in the right people with the right profile, with who can predict, and you can predict the success of them in your organization. The second of our webinars was around pipeline. So looking at optimal pipeline management, how you get opportunities into the pipeline, how you optimize the velocity of opportunities through the pipeline. Our webinar next week will be next Thursday at the same time. We'll be looking at sales enablement and how you can create an integrated approach to enablement, so it's integrated with the objectives of the business, the customer buying cycle, and salespeople's needs in terms of enablement. And so today, as Tracy said, we're going to look at an aspect of leadership, which is around coaching. And I mean, the agenda has been deliberately provocative because I believe that we have a way to go to improve the effectiveness of sales coaching. And I'll be sharing some of the evidence base for this, making that claim of informal, infrequent, ineffective. I'll be sharing some of the stats that indicate that there is a way to go with sales performance coaching. I mean, should we care? Well, actually, yes, because coaching does work. Research indicates that coaching can impact performance, productivity, engagement, retention, and the success of individuals in the sales environment. So, we really should be focusing on coaching and ensuring that our managers are coaching to best effect. We'll have a look at what we mean by effective sales coaching, and I'll also be providing a checklist so that you can use that checklist with your portfolio companies to determine whether they've got good practice coaching in place or whether they've got a performance coaching culture in place. And then one of the most important aspects of driving coaching behaviors and ensuring an organizational coaching culture is to really ensure that the coaching is endorsed and role modeled right the way through the organization. So it really has to start at the top with the leadership and leaders acting as coaching, who then coach the managers, who then coach the sales reps. That's really how you're going to get coaching culture and best practice throughout the whole of the organisation. And so I'm going to be closing the session out by just spending some time looking at who's coaching the coaches. And by this, I mean who's coaching the leaders, and also to challenge you in thinking as PE firms. I know a lot of you are getting more involved in the operational side of your portfolio companies, is just to challenge your thinking around whether you are using a coaching approach with your portfolio companies and the leadership teams in that in those companies. So 76% of companies identify that sales coaching is really important to success. This was some research done by the Sales Management Association in 2018. And yet the evidence suggests that it is poorly implemented for three main reasons. One, predominantly companies are taking an informal approach to coaching. Two, managers aren't focusing on it, so it's infrequently done. And then three, when it is done, it appears that it's not very effective, certainly not in some organisations. And when I say it's not effective, what I mean there is it's not delivered in a way that improves performance outcomes. So let's just have a look at this in a little bit more detail. So the current state of sales coaching, informal. Two companies have commented on this. CSO Insights is one and the Sales Management Association is the other. CSO Insights found that 63% of organisations were following a random approach to coaching. What they mean by that is that coaching was really left up to individual managers, sales managers, on whether they coached or not. There was no real guidance on what coaching should be focused on. So should we be coaching to skills or pipeline or territory, personal development? There was no real agreed way as to how to approach the coaching conversation. And frequency of coaching, how to identify coaching needs, none of these things have been standardized throughout the organization. This random approach is also identified by Sales Management Association, who identified that 63% of companies they surveyed were not holding managers accountable for coaching. And again, that sales leaders were left individually to define what sales coaching means and how to deliver it. So that's the case for informal. If we look at infrequent, sales managers report that they spend twice as much time on administration as they do on coaching. And 76% of companies surveyed say that managers spend too little time on coaching. They're spending less than 5 hours per week. And actually, in my experience, 5 hours per week is a generous amount of coaching hours. I've seen organizations where they're spending much, much less than 5 hours per week. I mean, the question is, are managers perhaps doing more coaching now that they're working remotely? And whilst I don't have a kind of research evidence base for this, I have been involved in some informal discussions, and Exec Vision, who are a coaching platform provider, they track the coaching hours through their platform that their companies who have the platform are doing. They're saying they are seeing an increase in coaching hours, not significant increase, but there is some increase, but they can't really comment on the quality of coaching. However, other companies that I've spoken to say, no, actually, we're not spending more time on coaching. We're spending more time homeschooling at the beginning of the year and more time on Zoom meetings. So I think, we don't know for sure that the lockdown has positively affected the amount of time that managers are spending coaching. And then only 38% of companies are setting manager-specific objectives for coaching. And in my experience, if something doesn't get monitored or measured, then often it doesn't get done. And so I think in not having coaching as a requirement for managers' performance, then we're missing an opportunity to actually get people to deliver coaching. So
Karen,
sure.
There is a question, let me, which I think speaks to the remote. I think it speaks to a couple things. So the question is around the first statistic. So what can companies do to shift the focus from administration to coaching, like a coaching task? So, in terms of sales managers, not spending time on coaching administrative things, but really actually coaching to the behaviors.
Yeah, thank you. I think sometimes it's a bit too easy to blame lack of time or administrative tasks on the reason for not coaching. And I really do think the shift has to come from individual managers. They have to want to make the shift in their focus, and they have to understand that they need to prioritize coaching within the requirements of the role and the current demands placed on them. If they really believe that coaching is going to have the benefit that we know it does, then it just becomes another part of the role that has to be prioritized. That's number one. And number two, I would say that leaders also need to prioritize coaching over administrative tasks and support the managers to make that shift. And that might mean looking at some of the admin workload being put on their managers to see if it's all necessary, or looking at ways to free up the time, but also just even making a statement that they want salespeople to be coached. It's an important part of achieving performance targets. I think that's something that leaders need to be doing as well. So when we look at, no problem. So when we look at the current state of sales coaching and the claim that it's ineffective, Sales Management Association again did a study, and 62% of the companies in the study identified that their sales coaching was ineffective, or at best somewhat effective. 55% of companies stated that their managers don't know how to coach. 34% of companies, only 34% of companies are reviewing coaching effectiveness in their performance appraisals. And I think what we see is that it's not uncommon for top performers to be promoted to become managers, or to be a top performer and join another organization as a manager. And whilst they might make great salespeople, they don't necessarily make great coaches. It's not uncommon, I think, for managers to, particularly if they think the salesperson doesn't have the required skill set and might risk losing the sale, to take over a sale. Or I've frequently seen managers coach by telling. So they tell somebody how to do something, or as I say, take it over and do it themselves. So I don't think naturally managers are good coaches. And we also know that managers are not overly invested in terms of their training to be coaching. So I don't think we can necessarily blame the managers. There's a study that said that 74% of companies aren't training their managers how to coach, despite it being, a real game changer in the terms of the ability for salespeople to perform and become successful. So I don't think we can blame managers, but I do think that we need to be very aware of this. And then again, when we look at how companies are recruiting managers, their selection criteria very often doesn't include coaching capability or coaching intention. And again, I think that's something that we need to be looking at and changing over time. So just, in summary, we need to get sales managers to a place where they're coaching consistently, they're coaching regularly, and they're applying needs-based coaching. So they're identifying the coaching requirements of their salespeople and coaching according to specific needs. This just talks to what I was saying earlier about managers think they're coaching when they're telling, and managers not being trained. I think we also need to be looking at, and some of this will be in the sales enablement webinar next week, is how we can give managers tools to support them in the coaching, and how we can give salespeople tools that will enable them to self-coach as well. So does coaching work? Well, the research says it really does, that we can get increased performance and productivity through coaching. And I'll share a slide with you in a moment that shows you something more specific about that. But Gallup identified that we got improved employee engagement and work satisfaction. This was across the total organization, not just in sales, but again, it shows that coaching does have an impact. And then this year, Coach Hub completed a study in which they identified that, I think it's linked with the former statement about engagement and work satisfaction, that coaching increased retention and loyalty. And when we think about the vast amount of money that can be spent on recruiting a salesperson and the huge cost when we lose a salesperson because we perhaps recruited the wrong person into the role, retention and loyalty, become really important. In a strong economic environment, as much as 30%, there's as much as 30% attrition within the sales function. It's much higher attrition in the sales function than we see in other areas of the business. In difficult economic times, it's still estimated to be around 20%. So as we know, there's a huge cost, not just in replacement, but also lost sales, loss of continuity with customers. So sales retention is really important because attrition has a far-reaching impact. And so if we can do something that really impacts that, I think that's very important. When we think about learning and attending training, again, companies spend a lot of money training their salespeople. And the return on investment can be significantly enhanced by supporting that training with coaching. You know, many of them, I'm sure, have had the experience of going on training and we come out of the course fired up. We're going to apply lots of new skills that we've learnt in the programme, and then over a period of the next couple of weeks, some of that intention sadly wanes, and maybe we've even forgotten some of the skill sets we learnt as well. And so by having somebody who can support training with coaching, we're going to help embed those best practices into the organisation, but also retain that learning. And as I say, that's a massive impact on return on investment. The stat at the bottom from CSO Insights. CSO Insights do a study. It's about once every 12 to 18 months, and they look at they benchmark best-in-class organisations. They have criteria associated with achievement of sales objectives, performance by sales reps, retention of sales reps, overall business performance, that identify the best-in-class organisations. And interestingly, those organisations who are identified or consistently classified as best-in-class, in their top 12 activities that they report that they contribute to successful performance, coaching is consistently in that top 12 list of activities that they engage in, that they feel that contributes to the success of their organisations. So we know it's a best-in-class activity to engage in. This just talks to the performance and productivity. So again, going back to the informal coaching process. So if we look at a step even below informal coaching process, where coaching is left up to the managers. So what we mean by this is it's ad hoc. It might happen if a manager has a particular view that coaching can support his team, but invariably we see it's not really happening. It's the thing that talks to ineffective in informal. And if we look at the performance of the sales teams and the sales individuals within an organisation where there is this ad hoc or coaching is left up to managers, only 49% thereabouts salespeople hit their target in this type of organisation. And in terms of win rates, so this is where a qualified opportunity has entered the pipeline and closed or not closed, and closed, only 44% thereabouts are closing successfully. So win rates are significantly down, when we're saying less than 50% of opportunities are closing successfully in that instance. If we compare that with the top group, where we have a dynamic coaching process, and here what we're saying is this is an organisation that mandates that their managers coach. There's agreed cadence of coaching. We're coaching to the sales process. We're coaching to skills. We're coaching to pipeline. There are sales enablement tools that support the coaching. It's part of managers' job responsibility to coach. What we see there is 76% of salespeople hit their target. And in terms of win rates here, we've got a 66% win rate. So 2/3 of opportunities that are entering the pipeline are closing successfully. So I think those stats in themselves just talk hugely to the benefit of having a coaching culture and coaching your salespeople. So in terms of defining sales coaching, I do see sales coaching as a little bit different or nuanced compared to perhaps leadership, management, personal coaching. There are three definitions here. The ICF definition is quite broad, as you can see. What I like about the ICF definition is it talks about potential, and certainly that's where we should be thinking of all of our coaching as being bringing out people's potential. So John Whitmore, he was an absolute guru. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but he's an absolute guru in coaching, and particularly in performance coaching and working with FTSE 200, Fortune 500 organizations to help them maximize performance through coaching. And that his definition is, again, it talks to potential, unlocking potential to maximize performance. But the third definition that we have there, I think, does talk to this nuance of sales coaching, that it's about coaching in context. Effective sales coaching needs to include coaching that is directly linked to the process and skills of coaching to be really effective. And that's, again, there's research that indicates if we coach to the sales process, then that's more effective than just a kind of more generic coaching. So ideally, we want the coaching to be aligned to a buyer journey and sales process. So you should be looking at your portfolio firms and asking them, have they mapped out their buyer journey and their sales process? The sales process needs to be mapped to the buyer journey. I think it's becoming particularly important to do that in the current environment, as we've been forced into a much more omni-channel environment, which is a big change for most salespeople. McKinsey identified that 90% of sales have moved to a virtual environment, with a greater emphasis on technology-enabled, omni-channel, inside sales. And 79% of B2B organizations don't expect this to change in the next 12 to 18 months. So given that we've got this big change for salespeople in terms of the way that the channels that they're now interacting with the buyers in, I really do think it's important for us to be looking at how we coach to the buyer journey and the sales process, and ensuring that salespeople are comfortable in the buyer journey and sales process and are interacting with their clients at appropriate stages in the sales process. We should also be looking at coaching across a range of activities within a range of sales activities. So yes, we should definitely be coaching to sales skills. Salespeople need to be able to demonstrate strong dialogue skills with our customers. And, in the same way that we see coaches coach by tell rather than ask, one of the biggest areas that I see salespeople less effective in their dialogue skills with customers is around questioning and that ability to ask really good questions. So that's a skill area that I think really does need focus and attention by managers. And then we should also be using the funnel to tell us, where should somebody be coached, but also, what's the state of this person's current pipeline. So, clearly people who are not filling the top of who've got a narrow, a kind of inverted, a triangular shaped pipe funnel, not putting enough in at the top, have got specific coaching needs. But also there's people who've got a kind of funnel that's bulging around the middle that suggests that opportunities are going in, but they're getting stuck there. They're not going through the funnel effective velocity. They're getting stuck somehow. That again would highlight to me that there's a coaching need there to understand why the opportunities are getting stuck, how I might be able to support a salesperson in making sure those things go through the pipeline. And then when we think about pipeline, I generally think about coaching to how do we generate opportunities, how do we manage those opportunities when they're actually in the pipeline, and then also how do we manage relationships. I think all three are equally important. And again, thinking about managing relationships now, you may have your portfolio companies may have organizations that have really been badly hit by COVID. The travel industry have, for example, who may not be buying from your portfolio companies right now, but we need to find a way of staying in touch with them, even though they're not buying for us, so that we're there for them in the long term. And so coaching salespeople to be able to stay in touch with their clients when there's not an opportunity on the table, I think is an important aspect of coaching. Ongoing feedback before there's a problem. Again, coaching should really start on day one. From the point at which the salesperson joins the organization, we should be thinking about their coaching needs. They should be tailored to the individual, but also we need to be giving ongoing feedback. It's no use waiting till there's a problem to start coaching. And again, this is where I think we often see sales managers focus what they call coaching is when there's a problem. And I would actually question whether that is really coaching. For me, it often manifests itself in heightened scrutiny of the salesperson's activities and giving performance feedback on whether they're now, improving to goal or not improving to goal. And so that to me does not feel like coaching. And I think if we can coach before there's a problem, then that feels much more like coaching to me, and is much more motivational to the salesperson. I mentioned about sales managers telling, we need to train managers to ask, not to tell. There's a great model that's, most coaches will know and use. Your portfolio companies may already be using this model, the GROW model. This was again developed by Whitmore. I'm going to talk to it a little bit more detail when we look at coaching leaders, but it's a really simple, pragmatic coaching model to use, and it will help managers ask rather than telling, just because of the way the model is set up. And then don't neglect middle and top performers, again, because we might be tempted to just focus on those people who aren't performing well. The temptation might be to leave those middle and top performers to their own devices. They equally need coaching. It's hugely motivational for somebody to have coaching, to have that sort of attention. And so we shouldn't be, we should be remembering not to neglect our middle and top performers. And then something that I think we perhaps don't think about when we're thinking about coaching salespeople is their support for their mental well-being. We often assume that sellers are resilient, that they can handle knockbacks, that they can pick themselves up. And in fact, I talk to organisations who they actively recruit for resilience. But I think, we can't be complacent in thinking that salespeople can always handle these knockbacks without appropriate support, particularly, I think, in the current environment. I mean, some research that was done pre-COVID identified that many salespeople were saying they felt isolated, and that, again, there's an indication that salespeople experience more rejection than any other role. And the idea of the salesperson as the lone wolf, I think, is an outdated view. Not only from the salesperson's perspective, that they do need to be supported and not feel isolated, but actually in terms of delivery of the sales experience to the customer, the lone wolf idea just doesn't work. We know that sales now are much more multidisciplinary, requiring sales, marketing, implementation. And so, the lone wolf is definitely an outdated view. And then if you think about layering in the COVID challenges, salespeople now lack of face-to-face interaction with the clients. That's something that most salespeople go into the role for, because they enjoy meeting with clients. They enjoy being face-to-face with their clients. They often go into the role because there's a huge amount of variety in the role. Today I could be working from home, tomorrow I'll be in the office, the next day I'll be with the client, I might be traveling. These are things that have all disappeared now because of this emphasis on not meeting our clients face-to-face and on this more of a technology-enabled sale. And then if you layer on concerns about redundancy, redeployment, juggling work at home, maybe not being able to kind of switch off, or finding it more difficult to switch off working in a home environment and create that demarcation between home and work, it really points to me to us thinking about how we can support the mental, psychological well-being of our salespeople. And so I think we need to be thinking about taking a holistic approach to salespeople and coaching salespeople, so that we look at them as a whole person rather than just focusing on their performance. And some of this coaching for psychological well-being might not be able to be done within the organisation. You might need to be thinking about whether you bring in external coaches to do that, because it can be quite difficult for people to talk about some of these subjects with their manager, might not feel comfortable talking about some of these subjects with their manager. And so that's something that organisations should be thinking about, is what's the balance between the coaching that we do internally and the coaching that we do with external coaches. So I just wanted to think a little bit about what is the coaching mindset. What I'm not suggesting is that all leaders and managers become expert coaches, qualified coaches. But I do think that they need to become more coach-like in their interaction with the team. They need to be adopting a coaching style in their leadership and management. And that's really a style that fosters learning, it encourages responsibility in the individual, it enables people, the focus is enabling people to grow and fulfill their coaching. I think we all benefit from coaching. So again, I reinforce that this is, a whole organization thing that we should really be looking at. That it should just come part of the way we do things around here, that we coach one another. I think we need to think about it being a relationship between two equals. And again, that's why I think when coaching just becomes something that's done as a remedial thing because it's a performance issue, it doesn't become a relationship between two equals in that instance. I'm a big advocate of using a strengths-based approach in coaching, identifying what people's strengths are and really building on those strengths and leveraging their strengths so that ultimately their weaknesses actually become much less important because we've really built on their strengths. Taking a solution focus versus a problem focus. So again, models like the GROW model really do emphasize that we're looking for solutions, we're looking for ideas and options to resolve the challenge as opposed to just focusing on the problem itself. And I think also the coaching mindset of recognizing that actually people are resourceful and do want to take responsibility. And if we can just enable them through the right questioning and through the right support, then they will, take that responsibility for their development and for their performance. It goes without saying that a coaching relationship has to be built on trust. And then that whole person approach is what I was alluding to or talking about previously, that particularly in the current environment, we need to not just focus on performance, we need to think about the whole person. And then I think it's worth mentioning that performance coaching is not the same as performance management. I see performance management as it's typically something that includes externally imposed goals that are reviewed maybe quarterly and usually annually by a manager. And coaching might be part of the performance management process. In some organisations, they will coach and include it as part of performance management. It's not the same. The performance management process itself is not the same as performance coaching. When you're coaching for performance, the goals are either identified by the coachee or they're collaboratively identified by the coachee and the manager. And thinking about options for and the route to achievement of those goals is determined by the coachee through the conversations that they have with their manager. And then feedback is not once a quarter, it would be a regular review and feedback, at least monthly, but in some instances it might be bi-monthly or even weekly. And so that's what I see as the difference really between performance coaching and performance management. And I think it's an important difference for us to be aware of.
Karen, there is a question about coaching mindset. How do you, I guess there's two parts to it. One is, how can you tell if a sales leader has a coaching mindset? I know you talked a little bit earlier that just about selection and training, but talk about that. And then the follow-on is, how do you help develop that? How do you help someone develop a coaching mindset?
Yeah, great. Thank you for the question. I mean, leaders that have a coaching mindset, you spot them a mile off. They're always coaching. You just see it in their behavior. They ask a lot of questions rather than giving answers. And when you coach in that way, when you, as a leader, you're enabling the team around you. I mean, I can give you an example. I've been guilty of not coaching, and staff would come to me and ask me, what do you think about X? What should I do about Y? And I'd give them the answer, which meant I had a fairly constant stream of people coming to me, to my, turning up at my desk to ask me for things or ask me for my view on things. And then I started to coach. And so instead of giving the answer, I would ask the individual, what did they think? How would they approach it? And to get them to really kind of engage with thinking about how they might come up with the answer. And initially, I still got people coming to my office, but over time, and asking questions, and we'd go through this same process again and again. So over time, they came to me less, or they came to me with a different dialogue. And the different dialogue is that they would state the issue, but then they would give me some ideas about how they think they should resolve it or how they approach it. They were thinking for themselves and really just checking in with me to, you know, to if they weren't sure. And I think this is a much more empowering way to interact with. It's much more empowering for individuals to kind of have that. So that's how I spot a leader who's got a coaching mindset. They're just always coaching. But in terms of the second part of your question, is it a mindset that can be developed? Absolutely it is. I really do think that when you believe in the power of coaching and you've seen the benefits that it brings, you'll want to manage and coach and lead in that way, because you'll know that the benefits, you know, are all on the upside. Is what we're talking about: the performance, the productivity, the retention, the motivation of individuals. So, you know, that is definitely, I would say, it's definitely something that can be developed and just become more front of mindset.
And there's a follow-on question, which is, what do you think is key to changing the mindset in sales leaders and managers?
I go back to just them believing in the power of coaching. And I think also training, you know, if they believe in the power of coaching, they'll do it. We should also be offering our managers training. Again, if you look at research, whilst we spend often a lot of money training salespeople, we don't invest, sales managers are underinvested in terms of their training. And I think, you know, just training them around how to coach, providing them with tools that support the coaching and that maybe even drive the coaching dialogue. So again, and I've worked with organizations that have asked me to design a sales process for them aligned to their buying process. And typically the sales process is in stages, and there's a number of key activities that the salesperson engages with in each of the sales stages. And what I've also done in that situation is then provide the managers with almost some best practice questions that they can ask at each stage of the sales process. So these are coaching questions that they can ask at each stage of the sales process to determine that the salesperson is engaging with the client in the way that we want them to check that they're engaging in sales best practice activities. And by giving managers some of the tools, the manager enablement tools as opposed to sales enablement tools, then I think again that helps people develop this coaching mindset.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that, it's really interesting what you're saying in terms of the roadmap, but there's also motivation. And while I think if you show, in my experience with sales leaders, if you show them, just like you're describing, give them the tools to coach, even if they're not naturally inclined to want to coach, I think what they start to see is the power of the impact that they have, and that really is motivational to them. So it's almost like the motivation might not be as obvious. It's obvious in some folks, and others it's not. And of course, the assessment, you know, you could use different types of assessments, which we have done in our practice. Obviously, we have the Tally assessment. It has a motivational component to it, and everyone's motivated by some aspect of doing better. And so you have to unleash some of that uniquely. And then when you give them these tools, as you're describing, I think you start to see the impact overall kind of exponentially increase, because they're aware of their impact on their team.
Absolutely, completely agree with you on that, Tracy. I think that actually, you were talking, I was also thinking about another aspect that can really turn managers onto coaching, if you like, is when they've been coached themselves. So, you know, if I talk to sales managers who do coaching, and you ask them, you know, why do they coach? They said because they'll often say, because, you know, when I was a salesperson, I had a manager who really coached me, and I just know what I got out of it. So just experiencing coaching yourself can help managers, you know, feel engaged and invested in coaching their sales teams. So I said I'd let you have a checklist for looking at your portfolio companies. If I was looking at an organization to determine, you know, were they implementing sales performance coaching, these are some of the questions that I would be asking. So is there a clearly articulated sales process mapping to the buying process? And then how are managers using that to coach to the stages in the sales process? Within the sales process, have we identified clear leading as well as lagging indicators of success? So if we identify the leading indicators, these can be great indicators to coach to. They can identify coaching requirements and drive the coaching dialogue. Does your organization or does your portfolio organization use an opportunity scorecard to determine the likelihood of success of winning deals? Again, these are great tools for coaching to really understand how likely it is, are we going to close this opportunity successfully? Are managers reviewing pipeline data and pipeline funnels and coaching on how to build the best funnel? What sales enablement tools have been created to support the manager in their coaching? And often these sales enablement tools or manager enablement tools the tools that you provide the managers can equally become a tool for the salesperson to self-coach. So again, in the instance I talked about creating a series of questions that the manager would ask the salesperson around the sales stages. If you give those questions to the salesperson, they can ask them of themselves and so start to self-coach as well. Robust onboarding program, that is a must for the first 90 days of the salesperson joining the organization, and that should include coaching. So as I said, coaching really needs to start on day one. Do managers joint call and observe their salespeople? I know we can't physically joint call with them now, but there's nothing to stop managers from getting on a Zoom or getting on a telephone call with their salespeople and the customers, and then using that as a vehicle for providing feedback post-call. Are there processes and tools for identifying the skill requirements and the skill gaps of team members? Again, this is important to be able to identify individual coaching needs. Do managers follow the salespeople following training? We talked about that in the context of return on investment. And is coaching an integral part of managers' objectives and performance goals? And then I would also be asking, can the organisation recognise when it's more appropriate to bring in external coaches? Is there a balance between internal coaches and external coaches? So some of the best practices around sales coaching programs, we kind of mentioned some of these, but to get a coaching program off the ground, it really does need to be endorsed by leadership. They really do need to be brought into it, and ideally they'll be role modeling the coaching themselves, and that's how you start creating a coaching culture. Link your coaching program to a corporate goal. So it might be we're coaching because we want to increase revenue, or we want to reduce time to sales productivity, or we want to improve employee retention. If you do that, then you can measure the success of your coaching and the return on investment of your coaching, which again, is going to encourage people to continue with the coaching or to do more coaching. Deliver coaching throughout the whole of the sales organization. I'd actually say not just the whole of the sales organization, the whole of the organization, but specifically, definitely think about delivering it through the whole of the sales organization, your top performers, your middle performers, and those perhaps new to the organization. We've mentioned about writing into manager goals. Align coaching to your sales enablement strategy. Again, when we talk about sales enablement next week, you'll see that coaching should be aligned to your strategy. Reinforce with performance support tools. Share the responsibility for coaching. So peer-to-peer and team coaching can all be included. It doesn't not just need to be the responsibility of the manager for coaching. Engage those exemplars in your organization and get them to coach as well. And we talked about internal, external coaches. So just sort of coming towards the end of our time, I wanted to focus on who's coaching the coaches. I'm focusing really on entrepreneurs and founders here because as PE firms, I imagine you are often dealing with entrepreneurs and founders. And there's some interesting stats that have come out about entrepreneurs and founders in terms of their psychological well-being. They're twice as likely to suffer from depression. They're twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts, and they're 3 times more likely to suffer substance abuse compared to the general population. And then at NatWest, the bank did a survey with their business, with their entrepreneurs and founders in their business customers, and 55% of those people responded, yes, running a business has a negative effect on my well-being. So this is a group of people potentially in your portfolio companies who are more prone to challenges around psychological well-being. And the causes have been identified as being just sheer workload and an inability to switch off, kind of feeling they're shouldering the burden of the business's success, feeling somewhat isolated, and having maybe not strong support networks about things that so they can talk about these things. Personality type tend to be that more A type personality, and then there's some messaging around setting up a business around there's no pain, no gain, and so I think sometimes perhaps entrepreneurs and founders can be a bit reluctant to talk about some of these challenges because they see it as part of the way to do business. If we want to gain, we have to go through some of this pain. And so I think we should be thinking about how we work with leaders in organizations to coach them. And I do think there's a role, for you as PE firms, when you're interacting with your portfolio, the leaders in your portfolio teams, to also adopt a coaching style. And the GROW model is something that I said I would highlight. It's a model developed by John Whitmore. It's been around for quite a while, but that doesn't make it dated by any stretch of the imagination. It's a simple model, as you can see. It's 4 steps in it, and many organisations are bought into this model because they've seen the success of it. And so the GROW stands for goals, reality, options, and will. So in the conversation that you're having with your business leaders, the sorts of questions you'll be asking there, predominantly what questions: what are your goals, what are your business goals, performance goals, but also don't forget about their personal goals as well. What is the desired end result? What stretch might this goal bring to you? What would a successful outcome look like? What are the challenges, obstacles, or risks do you anticipate in successful achievement of your goal? So those are the questions that we'll be asking in relation to the G part of the GROW model. And then we would be moving on to thinking about reality. So let's look at what is the current situation? Where is the current situation in terms of your ideal outcome? On a scale of 1 to 10, where are you versus where you would like to be? What have you already tried? What have you already done? What has been the outcome? What do you need to stop, start, continue doing? And again, thinking about some of the personal piece for them. What's on your shoulders? How does this affect you, and how does this affect other areas of your life? In thinking about the next, having kind of identified the goal, having identified the current state versus the future state, desired state, then look at the options. How do you plan to achieve your goal, address the challenges, address the obstacles and risks? Get them to think about other options. How else might you do it? What are the alternatives? Who can support you in this? So again, thinking about them feeling that they have to shoulder the responsibility themselves. Get them to start thinking about what resources they have in terms of network, in terms of other people in the business that might be able to support them in achievement of the goals. And then starting to think about, well, what are the steps you could take? What has worked before that now what might work now? What might you need to do differently this time around? And then with the will, we're saying this is really where we're trying to pin down the action plan in terms of, what needs to be done, when, by who, how will you measure progress? How will you measure success? How will you have interim steps to check that will ensure your action plan is on track? How committed are you to this action plan? And then from there, what is your immediate next step right now? I think, these are some of the questions you could be asking the leaders in your portfolio firms, and that they could also be asking, the leaders in those firms could also be asking their sales managers. And it really sets the dialogue up for an ask dialogue versus a tell dialogue. So that was really all I wanted to cover today. Tracy, I don't know if there are any more questions that are in the chat box.
There is one other question which has to do, I think it's about how do you report the structure. So it says here, what is the most effective functional reporting structure for sales coaching to ensure its success? Should it be within the sales team itself? I know a lot of portfolio companies don't have a dedicated HR person. So is it sales enablement? How do you recommend that to ensure success?
Yeah, good question. It requires ideally requires a multidisciplinary approach, but I still would say that the responsibility for ensuring it happens really needs to sit with the sales function. They need to have ownership of the desire to create a coaching culture and the will to coach. But, you know, tapping into other areas of the organization, other disciplines, is equally, you know, important. So sales enablement, for example, can provide valuable coaching tools to support the process. HR, if you've got an HR team, they can be valuable in supporting managers in getting the training organized to train them in the coaching skills. Sales ops, you know, that they are often the holders of data, so pipeline reporting, and, you know, so they can provide reporting to managers that can help managers identify coaching needs. We know we talked about pipeline shape, we talked about velocity through the pipeline. Sales ops might be also a team that could perhaps take responsibility for monitoring and reporting the effectiveness and the ROI of coaching. And then leaders, we said leaders need to be brought into it to write coaching goals into their sales managers' performance requirements. So that's the kind of multidisciplinary team that I feel would come together to really establish a coaching culture in an organisation. But at the end of the day, the responsibility is with the managers to actually drive and deliver the coaching.
Okay. And then a follow on to that is, to get started, would you suggest bringing in, I know you said this a couple of slides ago, but bringing in an outside expert to help set up the program?
If you don't feel you have the resource in-house, I mean, a lot of HR personnel will understand coaching and how to set up a coaching program. So it may be that you've got the resources, that your portfolio firms have the resources in-house to set up a coaching program. But certainly, you know, it goes without saying really that if you don't feel you've got that resource in-house, then bringing in an external expert who can advise on how to set up the program, get buy-in to the program, who can advise on some of the tools that you might want to introduce as part of your sales enablement, manager enablement tools. Definitely, you know, there are resources out there like myself who, you know, who could do that with organizations. So I think you really have to look at what you've got in-house, and if not, supplement what you've got in-house with external.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any other questions. So as I said at the beginning, and I just really want to thank you, Karen, this was wonderful, a wealth of information, certainly a lot to think about, and also a lot of pragmatic steps here to get going. For those on the call, as I said, here's Karen's contact information. We will be sending this out in the slides. The slides will be going out right after. We're also going to upload the recording to our YouTube channel so you can listen as well. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. And next week, we will be calling it a wrap, bringing it all together with Mike Kunkel and Sales Enablement. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.